September 16, 1935. Cotton Club, Harlem. A street enforcer smacked Bumpy Johnson across the face right in front of 200 people. 4 seconds passed. No response. No rage. 47 minutes later, Harlem's entire power structure changed. This wasn't pride or revenge. It was a calculation. One man absorbed public humiliation to trigger a complete collapse. So how did a single open-handed slap collapse an entire criminal hierarchy? To answer that, we go back to where it truly began. September 16, 1935. The Cotton Club reeked of wealth covering up fear. 200 bodies crammed into a space built for 100. Sweat pouring through silk. Duke Ellington's sophisticated lady kept looping needle worn down, skipping every fourth note. No one bothered to stop it. The whiskey kept coming. The coke kept downtown tourists awake long enough to pretend Harlem wanted them past midnight. Bumpy Johnson sat at table 7, back to the wall. That's survival past 30 in a game where most don't see 25. His drink $8 a bottle came from a Little Italy wine shop, delivered by Carmine. Carmen remembered the night Bumpy slashed 3 Sicilians who tried to hijack the garment district. He paid in wine and silence. Bumpy accepted both. The back door creaked open 30 minutes to midnight. Mickey Doyle walked in like he held the deed to the building and a receipt for everyone's lungs. Doyle collected debts for Dutch Schultz. That meant shattered knees and torched bodegas, $200 suit. Shoes so bright they could show you your own funeral, hands like bricks. Knuckles ruined from years of breaking men through glass. He stopped at Bumpy's table. No nod, no request. No recognition of the man who ran the numbers game from 110th to the Polo Grounds. Doyle's hand came up fast wide open, struck Bumpy so hard the smack cracked over the music. Conversations died mid-word. Heads turned. Bumpy's head snapped. Sideways. A red mark bloomed across his face. Blood filled his mouth from a torn cheek. The drink on the table wobbled but didn't spill. His hand never lifted. His body never flinched. He checked his jaw once, then went still. He turned back. Slowly. Like a man who'd eaten worse and buried worse. His eyes locked on Doyle's. Cold. Still. Like frozen lake water. Doyle waited. Waited for the outburst. For Bumpy to rise, pull the .38 snub nose hidden under his left arm. For chairs to fly and sirens to come. Instead, Bumpy lifted his wine with his left hand. Drank slow. Like it was Sunday and he was home alone. The silence wasn't calm. It was a room holding its breath. 200 people realizing they had just seen a man accept death. And right someone else's. Stephanie St. Clair sat 2 tables down. She didn't blink. She understood exactly what this was. You do not interrupt a man during a quiet execution. Doyle's face drained. He expected fury, territorial rage, a street answer. Instead, he got nothing. And nothing is worse. Because nothing means the answer is being designed, custom, precise, destructive. He opened his mouth, nothing came. He stepped back once, then again, like a man who just realized he'd signed his own death warrant. In front of witnesses, Bumpy placed his glass down, same wet ring, same spot. He tilted his head just slightly. Doyle saw it, understood it. You didn't just get killed. You bought a death that will last hours, and when your body shows up in the Bronx, your own mother won't know it's you. Doyle reached the exit 9 minutes before midnight. He stepped into the dark, chasing a future that would never come. He had 47 minutes left. He didn't know it yet. Bumpy stood, smoothed his jacket, walked toward the back office where the real meetings took place. Men watched him pass. They'd seen him take a public slap without reacting. and every single one of them understood the message. A man who can swallow that level of insult in front of that many people isn't weak. He's lethal. He's patient. He's already decided how this ends. He's the kind of man who'd set an entire block ablaze just to prove crossing him costs more than anyone can afford. In the back office. Stephanie glanced up from her ledger. "You're going to make him suffer," she said. It wasn't a question. Bumpy gave one slow nod. "I'm going to drag it out so long, Dutch Schultz will feel every second. And no, Harlem can't be bought." She returned to her figures. He pulled out a chair, sat, and began dialing numbers. 18 phone calls. 18 pieces now in motion. Men who owed favors, men who understood tonight was collection night. Payment due in pain, interest paid in scars and fire. The clock above the bar ticked down 7 minutes to midnight. In 47 minutes, Mickey Doyle would stop feeling safe. In 8 hours, he'd stop believing in anything. And in 7 days, Dutch Schultz would learn some lines cost more than money can repay. The Cotton Club reset. Chatter returned. Glasses clinked. Someone finally changed the record, but every person who walked out that night knew what they had seen. The first spark of a war. One that would leave corpses piled like firewood and rewrite Harlem's entire power map. Bumpy Johnson had been slapped. In front of 200 witnesses, and his silence? It wasn't surrender. It was a vow, one that would spill red before the month was done. 3 days before Mickey Doyle stepped into the Cotton Club, Harlem still followed a system, one that fed 50,000 people. When banks slammed their doors, the numbers game wasn't just luck. It was survival. A housemaid could risk a nickel on Tuesday and win $8 by Friday. That meant food. That meant rent. That meant dignity. Stephanie St. Clair ran the racket with clean books and an iron fist. She was 42, built an empire. From dust and ruled with fear sharp enough to draw blood. Bumpy was her right hand. But calling him muscle was like calling a neurosurgeon a butcher. He kept order without a badge, which meant he had to outthink the cops and outkill the competition. Then came Dutch Schultz. He ran bootleg whiskey in the Bronx, made millions with a sledgehammer and a smile. He looked at Harlem and saw profit margins that made his liquor money look small. So he made a move. On a Tuesday morning, Schultz sent 12 men into Harlem, split into crews of 3, hit the number spots on Lenox and 125th. Every stop, same message: you work for Dutch now. Pay up or burn with your building. They carried milk bottles full of gasoline, pistols tucked in holsters, bats stained with the memory of someone else's skull. At a barber shop on 132nd, they found Calvin Brooks, 19 years old, loyal since 15. Half his pay sent home to his mother. One of Schultz's thugs put a gun to Calvin's head. Sighed, "You're with us now. Hand it over or drop dead." Calvin gave them $240, spent the next hour throwing up in the alley, because he knew what happened when you stole from Quinny St. Clair. Within 48 hours, 18 hits, $4,000 stolen. One runner's arm snapped like dry wood. One store torched to ash on 8th Avenue. The police didn't lift a finger. Captain Howard from the 28th was already bought $300 a month. Bumpy sat upstairs in Queenie's office, above a dress shop on 7th Avenue, listening to the reports come in, notebook in hand. Black leather cover, names, times, addresses, Queenie. Paste. Smoke trailing from her cigarettes, dropping into an ashtray, overflowing with rage. She wanted retaliation. Now. "We hit them now," she said. Voice sharp as broken glass. Hard, loud, so they remember. Bumpy kept writing. Calm. Steady. "And then what?" he asked. "Schultz sends 20 more. Then 50. Then he brings in his Italian friends. And now we're bleeding on 6 fronts. So we do nothing?" she asked. Eyes sharp, voice cutting. We let them steal everything? Bumpy closed the book, looked at her with eyes that had. Watched men bleed out slowly. We let him think he's winning. We let him feel safe. We let him believe Harlem is his now. And then? We remind him, taking something is not the same as keeping it. That's not an answer, she snapped. That's a speech. Bumpy stood, walked to the window, looked down on 7th Avenue. The answer, he said, is patience. Schultz thinks Harlem folds like the Bronx, guns, fire, fear, but Harlem has rules he doesn't understand yet, and when he breaks enough of them, the people who matter will do our work for us. Queenie lit another cigarette. Deep breath. You mean the Italians? Bumpy nodded once. Luciano doesn't like noise. Doesn't like heat. Doesn't like white men stirring chaos in areas his people profit from. Schultz keeps smashing things, and Lucky will do the math. Eventually, he'll decide Schultz isn't worth the trouble. And if Luciano does nothing? Bumpy turned from the window, smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then we do it ourselves. Smart, clean, quiet. So, when it's over, nobody traces it to us, and we're still standing. For 3 days, Bumpy didn't lift a finger. But behind the curtain, everything moved. He had watchers on every Schultz thug tracking the bars they drank in, the women they trusted, the paths they took back to the Bronx. In his EdgeCom Avenue apartment, a map of Harlem lay across the kitchen table. Red pins marked every hit. Thin thread traced their pattern, and the net? It was already closing. He kept a second notebook, not just names of Schultz's crew, but their girlfriends, their brothers, their favorite bars, and the garages where their cars slept at night. On the third night, Queenie showed up at his apartment. Found him still awake at 2 a.m., eyes locked on the map spread across his table. She poured herself a glass of whiskey without a word. They hit 6 more spots today, she said. Took $5,000. Smashed Jimmy Dawson's jaw with a tire iron just for asking for time to think. Bumpy traced a line on the map, his finger following a red thread. Bronx to Harlem, then back again. Good, he said. Let them take the money. Let them break whatever they want. Every dollar they touch is evidence. Every bone they snap is a witness. And when the time comes, all of it will be used in ways they won't see until it's too late. You almost sound like you want them to win, she said. He looked up, locked eyes with her. I want them overconfident. I want them sloppy. I want thinking Harlem folded. Because that's when men like Schultz get arrogant enough to trip. Queenie downed her whiskey in one swallow. And if they don't make mistakes? Bumpy turned back to his map, moved a pin, adjusted a thread. Then we'll make the mistakes for them. We'll build traps that look like territory. Let them walk into it smiling, thinking they won another corner. And when the trap shuts, they won't walk out. How long do we wait? She asked. He checked the clock. Still 2 a mot long now. They're getting lazy. One of them's going to do something loud, in public. That's when we strike. What kind of stupid are you waiting on? Queenie crushed her cigarette, lit another right away. Bumpy smiled. But it was hollow, the kind of smile that stayed. Behind the eyes, the kind where they put hands on us. In front of witnesses, the kind that lets us respond without explanation, because now everyone watching will know why it had to happen. You already know what you're going to do, she said. It wasn't a question. Bumpy gave a slow nod. I've known since they first set foot here. I've been building it, piece by piece, name by name, street by street. All I need now is the spark, and Schultz will light that himself. They always do. 3 days after Schultz's invasion, Mickey Doyle walked into the Cotton Club and slapped Bumpy Johnson in front of 200 people. The spark had landed. The match was lit. And somewhere deep inside, Bumpy smiled, because Doyle had just signed his own death warrant without knowing it. 47 minutes left before the trap shut tight. 47 minutes until Harlem learned the price of breaking the rules that kept people breathing. Real power isn't who throws the first punch. It's who's still upright when the bleeding stops, and everyone's looking for someone to tell them what comes next. Mickey Doyle stepped out of the Cotton Club at 9 minutes to midnight and realized the door behind him had locked. His car was parked 3 blocks down Lenox Avenue. A black Packard. Should have taken 5 minutes. Instead, he stood on the corner, watching the exit vanish body by body. 6 men had appeared on the sidewalk between him and the car. No weapons. No threats. Just smoking, standing exactly where he had to pass. Stepped into the road, but a delivery truck rolled up and stopped. Engine rumbling, blocking the lane. His hands began to shake. He turned back toward 8th Avenue. More figures. 3 here, 4 there, on every corner. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked straight at him, but they were watching, tracking, like wolves. In the Cotton Club's back room, Bumpy Johnson picked up the phone and dialed Dutch Schultz. 4 rings. Then came Schultz's voice, gravel wrapped in steel. You? Calling about Mickey? Bumpy kept his tone level. I'm giving you a choice. Your man laid hands on me in front of 200 people. Now those people are waiting to see the outcome. Get to it, Schultz growled. Bumpy leaned back. Send your man back inside. Have him apologize publicly. Then pull your crew out of Harlem for good. And he walks away. Schultz laughed, sharp, nasty, like a broken bottle dragged across ribs. And if I tell you to go to hell? Bumpy looked out the window, saw Mickey Doyle trapped on that corner, nowhere to run. Then he dies right here. We leave his throat open in an alley. You send 20 more tomorrow? I'll send back 20 coffins. You've got 30 minutes. Choose. The line went quiet. Not dead, just silent, as Schultz weighed a man's life against the cost of retreat. Bumpy waited, counting seconds, measuring whether Mickey would die clean or messy, until Schultz finally spoke. You think some street runners from Harlem can dictate terms to Dutch Schultz? His voice was sharp, indignant. This is my city. If Mickey has a rough night, that's his issue, not mine. So that's your answer, Bumpy said, flat. Schultz's breath rasped through the line. My answer is this: do whatever you want with Mickey. Tomorrow I'm sending 50 men into Harlem and we'll burn everything you built to the ground. We'll set fire to every number spot, every speakeasy, every storefront that touches your money. Bumpy's jaw tensed. His grip on the phone turned bone white. Then we understand each other, he said. You just picked your ego over your man's life. Let's see what that costs. He hung up. Didn't wait for a response. Queenie turned from the window. He said no. Bumpy gave a single nod. He's too arrogant. Too blind. He thinks letting Mickey die is cheaper than apologizing to someone like me. He picked up the phone again. Dialed a different number. It rang once. A voice answered. It's time, Bumpy said. The one outside the Cotton Club. Take him to the Girard Avenue warehouse. Don't touch him. Just get him there. Wait for me. He turned to Queenie. Call Tommy and Ray. Have them bring the car out back 20 minutes. What are you going to do? She asked. He buttoned his coat. Checked a .38 under his arm. I'm going to show Dutch Schultz what it means to offer a choice. And choose wrong. When they find what's left of Mickey Doyle, even Schultz will understand the message. On the street, Mickey Doyle tried to bolt east toward the bridge. Made it half a block before 3 men stepped out from a doorway. Blocked his way. He pivoted, ran the opposite direction, only to see 4 more step into view. He yanked the pistol from his shoulder holster, held it in both hands. Screamed at them to back off. No one moved. No one spoke. They just watched him, like the outcome had already been decided. He fired twice into the air. The cracks echoed down brownstone walls. Windows stayed dark. No sirens, no help. The men didn't even flinch. He fired again, aimed this time, missed by 3 feet. His hands were shaking too much. The weapon clicked empty. Doyle hurled it at the closest man, turned to run, and slammed into a parked car. Ribs cracked, breath knocked out. He collapsed to his knees, gasping. 3 men approached, slow, calm, unrushed. Mr. Johnson wants a word. You can walk. Or we'll carry you. Doyle tried to stand. His legs buckled. 2 of them lifted him effortlessly, dragged him to a black sedan waiting at the curb, headlights off, engine running low. They placed him in the back, wedged between 2 men who reeked of cigarettes and cold metal. The car eased forward, turned south, and vanished toward the Bronx, toward a warehouse with windows painted black and no neighbors for 3 blocks. A place where you could scream all night and not a soul would hear. Inside that warehouse, tools lined the wall in perfect order. A wooden chair sat bolted to the floor. A drain in the center stained old and still very much in use. Mickey Doyle would spend 8 hours in that chair, learning what it cost to lay hands on the wrong man in the wrong burrow on the wrong night. 47 minutes had passed since Mickey slapped Bumpy in the Cotton Club. In that moment, Dutch Schultz had picked pride over peace and signed off on his man's execution. That one decision would cost him more than just Doyle's life before the month was over. In the world Bumpy Johnson ruled, silence was never neutral. Refusing to answer was an answer, and tonight that answer was an execution. Slow, deliberate, delivered by a man who knew that true power isn't in making threats. True power is in making examples. The kind that live on long after the screaming stops. The Girard Avenue warehouse had sat empty for 3 years, ever since the textile company folded and the bank decided the property was more valuable as a loss on paper. The windows were sealed black from the inside. Dock doors chained. Surrounded by empty lots where only weeds and broken bottles grew. If you needed a place where no one would hear the pain, this was it. Bumpy Johnson arrived just after 4 a.m. His car rolled to a stop near the side entrance. Tommy and Ray were waiting, smoking in the damp September air. The wind carried the scent of rain. They crushed out their cigarettes and opened the door without speaking. Inside, a single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering, casting shadows that danced across the floor like they were alive. Mickey Doyle sat bound to a wooden chair, fixed to the concrete. His wrists were tied behind him, ropes biting deep. His ankles cinched to the chair legs. One side of his face was swollen. Someone had struck him in the car. Not hard enough to break bone, just enough to make breathing difficult. He wasn't gagged. Noise didn't matter here. Bumpy's footsteps echoed as he crossed the floor. He stopped 5 feet from the chair, removed his hat, placed it on a metal table lined with tools, pliers, a ball-peen hammer, a folded straight razor, a blowtorch with a half-full tank. He didn't touch any of them. He just stood there, staring at Mickey Doyle, the way a doctor does before explaining the kind of diagnosis that comes with no chance of recovery. Do you know why you're here? Bumpy's voice was calm, almost polite. Mickey's breathing came in shallow bursts. He tried to answer, but all that escaped was a weak hiss like air leaking from a punctured tire. Bumpy waited. Let him search for words. At last, Mickey forced them out. Schultz will kill you for this. He'll burn Harlem to the ground. Bumpy shook his head slowly. No, Schultz already decided. He stepped closer. I called him. I gave him a way to get you out alive. All he had to do was apologize and leave Harlem alone. Bumpy paused. He chose his image instead. He chose his name. Mickey swallowed hard. He told me to do whatever I wanted with you, Bumpy continued. That means you're not his concern anymore. He leaned in slightly. You're mine. The color drained from Mickey's face, not pale, not gray-white. Like paper, he said. He said that? Mickey whispered. Bumpy nodded once. Those were his exact words. So now we're here, Bumpy said, and I'm going to explain something to you about money, about respect, and about what it costs to put hands on someone in front of 200 witnesses. He turned to the table, picked up the straight razor, opened it slowly. The blade caught the overhead light, shining like still water. In my world, Bumpy said evenly, reputation is currency. You can have money stacked to the ceiling. But if no one fears you, if no one respects you, you have nothing. He looked back at Mickey. You walked into my house. You struck me in front of everyone who does business with me. Bumpy let the silence sit. If I let that go, he continued, then tomorrow every corner hustler thinks they can do the same. He tilted his head slightly. You understand what that means? Mickey was crying now. Tears ran down his face, mixing with sweat. I was following orders, he sobbed. Schultz told me to send a message. I was just doing my job. Bumpy closed the razor. Set it back down, then he picked up the ball-peen hammer. Weighed it in his hand. I know you were following orders, he said. That's why you're here instead of sleeping in your own bed. He stepped closer. But orders don't erase what happened. And they don't change what comes next. What followed took 8 hours. According to the men who were there, the details were never written anywhere official. What is known is that Bumpy Johnson spoke the entire time. His voice never rose, never turned angry. He explained the streets. The way a teacher explains arithmetic to a student who refuses to understand. He talked about fear, about authority, about why a business collapses the moment people believe you're weak. The tools on the table were used. Not all of them, but enough. The razor, the pliers, the hammer. Each applied carefully, not out of rage, but instruction, not to cause the most pain, but to deliver a lesson that would survive the night. Mickey Doyle screamed until his voice broke. Then he screamed, without sound, mouth open, nothing coming out but breath and wet noise as his body shut down piece by piece. Tommy and Ray stood near the door, smoking, not watching directly, but aware of every second under that single light. They'd seen this before. They would see it again. This was how order was maintained when contracts weren't enforced by courts and disagreements weren't settled by lawyers. This was the law. By noon, Mickey could no longer scream. By 2 p.m., he couldn't understand words. By 4 o'clock, he was barely breathing, chest rising in shallow movements that wouldn't last much longer. Bumpy washed his hands in a bucket, dried them, put his jacket back on like a man heading to a meeting. Take him to the Bronx, he said. Leave him where Schultz's people will see him. He paused. Make it obvious. Tommy and Ray cut the ropes, lifted what remained of Mickey Doyle, like furniture being moved. He was still breathing when they closed the trunk. Barely. He wouldn't be by the time they arrived. They left him on the steps of a social club on Arthur Avenue, where Schultz's crew gathered every morning. The sun rose at 6:15, at 6:20. The first man arrived. He recognized what was left of the face and ran inside to make a call that would wake Dutch Schultz with news that would poison his entire week. The message was carved into Mickey's chest, written in his own fluids, cut deep enough to read from 10 feet away. Harlem is not for sale, clear, final, impossible to misread. Schultz could send 50 men, or 500. Every one of them would see Mickey Doyle and wonder if the money was worth dying the same way. Fear spreads faster than confidence, and once it takes hold, No amount of money can buy it back. Bumpy Johnson went home at dawn, showered, put on a clean suit. Then he went to the Cotton Club for breakfast like nothing had happened. The newspapers never covered Mickey Doyle. The police never asked questions. He simply disappeared, the way men sometimes do when they cross lines that were never meant to be tested. You can seize territory with guns. You can buy cops. You can intimidate civilians, but you cannot erase fear once it's been properly planted. And that morning, on the steps of a Bronx social club, Dutch Schultz learned that Harlem wasn't defended by muscle alone. It was defended by memory. By a man who understood that real power doesn't come from the violence you commit, but from the stories people tell afterward when they remember what happens to anyone who tries. 7 days after, Mickey Doyle stopped breathing on the steps of a Bronx social club. 8 more of Dutch Schultz's men vanished from Harlem, and not a single bullet echoed in public. It wasn't some coordinated ambush. No street war. No headlines. They just stopped showing up. No phone calls. No bodies left in doorways. No trace that could be pinned on Bumpy Johnson or anyone connected to Harlem. The first body appeared floating in the East River, throat carved. So wide open, the coroner said it looked like someone tried to take the head off with a butter knife and gave up halfway. The second never clocked in for his protection route on 128th. His car was found outside his apartment, keys still in the ignition, driver's seat soaked through with fluids that told the whole story before anyone opened the trunk. The third, fourth, and fifth, last seen leaving a Bronx bar together, boasting about how they were going to teach Harlem a lesson. 3 days later, they turned up beneath a concrete pour at a construction site in Queens. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no questions. The police were interested in asking. The NYPD filed it the way they always did when known criminals died quietly, a report, a shrug, and no follow-up. Schultz knew who was behind it. But knowing and proving are separate things. And Bumpy Johnson never left proof. Just messages. By the end of the week, Schultz was down 11 men. Not wounded. Not jailed. Gone. The one still breathing started asking questions. Whether Harlem was worth dying for. Whether the payout was worth waking up in a river. Whether Dutch had picked the wrong battlefield with the wrong enemy. But Bumpy wasn't Schultz's biggest problem. Lucky Luciano was. Luciano, head of the commission, ran the mafia like a boardroom. Territories, rules, profits, peace. And one rule above all: no chaos that brings attention. Luciano didn't care about pride. He cared about control. He hated heat. He hated press. And Schultz was lighting fires in the wrong neighborhood. Newspapers were asking questions. The NAACP was demanding investigations. Church leaders were delivering Sunday sermons about white gangsters attacking black neighborhoods. Federal attention was starting to circle. Every day Schultz stayed in Harlem, the risk grew bigger for everyone. So Luciano's partner, Frank Koslow, the diplomat of the operation, called a sit-down in Little Italy. Schultz thought he was there to talk tactics. Instead, he walked into a back room where 5 men who controlled more money than he'd ever touch were waiting, and every one of them looked at him like a problem they needed to eliminate. Luciano skipped the pleasantries. "You're bringing heat on all of us," he said. "Get your people out of Harlem. Find somewhere else to expand, preferably one that doesn't turn into a racial powder keg every time someone misses a payment." Schultz's face turned red. His jaw clenched. "I'm not backing down to some street hustler who thinks he owns Harlem," he snapped. "I sent 11 men in. I'm not pulling them out just because you're afraid of headlines." Koslow leaned forward. His voice was calm, measured. "You sent 11 men in," he said, "and lost all 11. The numbers don't work. And worse, you've turned Harlem into a symbol. A test. Now others are watching to see if someone can challenge us and walk away. You're not just losing men. You're making us all look weak. Schultz stood. His chair scraped the floor like a warning. I'm not leaving Harlem. I'll torch that whole neighborhood before I back down. And if any of you have a problem with that, we can settle it right here. The room went still. 5 men stared at him like they'd already begun planning the funeral. Luciano didn't blink. His voice didn't shift. Sit down, Dutch. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Schultz didn't sit. He walked out. Back to his car. Back to the Bronx. Thinking he'd stood his ground. What he didn't understand was that walking out of that room was the same as signing a death warrant. The commission didn't give suggestions. They gave final decisions, and when someone refused to follow them, that someone was replaced quietly. 3 weeks later, October 23rd, Dutch Schultz walked into the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey with 3 of his men. They sat in a back room, drinking beer, playing cards, talking about Harlem. Talking about how they were going to fix it with more muscle, more blood, more fire. They had no idea how close the fire really was. At 10:32 p.m., the back door opened. 3 men stepped inside the Palace Chop House. They didn't ask questions. They didn't issue warnings. They fired 8 rounds. 2 bullets struck Dutch Schultz in the gut. He stumbled into the restroom, collapsed against the tile wall, and slid to the floor, bleeding into the grout like water into sand. He lived for 22 more hours. Long enough to give police a rambling, incoherent statement. His mind swimming in blood, his body failing, his thoughts scrambled by the shutdown of vital organs. The newspapers called it another gangland hit. The NYPD called it unsolved. Lucky Luciano called it necessary. And Bumpy Johnson, reading about it over eggs and espresso in the Cotton Club, understood exactly what had happened. Schultz had ignored the rules. He brought noise. He triggered a war he couldn't win and refused to stop it when warned. So the system removed him, cleanly, completely, like a surgeon excising rot before it spreads. Harlem went back to its rhythm. Queenie St. Clair kept her ledgers. Bumpy kept the peace. And every man watching from the sidelines understood a lesson that would echo for decades. You can fight a man. You can fight for turf. But if you threaten the machine itself, if you endanger the structure that prints money and keeps peace, the system will erase you, not out of vengeance, not out of pride, but because chaos costs money and business always wins. 3 days after Dutch Schultz took his last breath in a Newark hospital, Harlem had no outside boss. The power vacuum didn't last long. Frank Koslow called Bumpy Johnson directly, suggested a meeting, neutral ground, strictly business. They met at a steakhouse in Midtown, private room, no witnesses, only the men they trusted to keep things quiet. Koslow lit a cigarette, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and got to the point. Schultz made mistakes, he said. He thought violence was strategy. Thought grabbing territory meant he could hold it. You proved him wrong. And the commission respects that. So here's what we're offering. Harlem stays yours. You run the numbers. You keep order. We don't interfere. We don't send anyone in. We don't touch your profits. Bumpy listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't blink. When Koslow finished, Bumpy asked one question. And what do you want? In return? Koslow smiled. The kind of smile that says, you get it. We want peace. We want Harlem quiet. No bodies in the street. No front pages. If someone tries to push in, you handle it quietly. Keep your house in order, we'll keep ours. Nobody crosses the line. Bumpy extended his hand. Koslow shook it. The deal was done. Harlem would remain independent, not by force, but by agreement. An understanding between men who knew real power doesn't come from the war you win, It comes from knowing which war not to start. For the next 30 years, the Italian families never touched Harlem. Not because they couldn't, but because they gave their word to a man who'd earned it, man who taught them what happens when you ignore the rules everyone else respects. The story of that night at the Cotton Club outlived every man who witnessed it. Mickey Doyle's name disappeared by the following year. No one spoke of him. No one remembered. He became a footnote, the man who made the mistake that proved Bumpy Johnson could not be touched. But Bumpy? They remembered when he walked down 125th Street, people stepped aside. Not out of fear, but out of respect. When he drank wine at the Cotton Club, no one interrupted unless invited. When he spoke, people listened because his voice carried the weight of a man who had defended a neighborhood without burning it down. In 1968, Bumpy Johnson collapsed in Wells Restaurant. Heart attack. At his funeral, thousands lined the streets. Carlo Gambino, head of New York's most powerful crime family, sent a 6-foot wreath. A card attached read, "A man of his word." Frank Costello, retired in Florida, called Stephanie St. Clair personally. He offered condolences and reminded her, the agreement made in 1935 still stands. For as long as she wanted it, the Cotton Club is long gone. The Girard Avenue warehouse was bulldozed, turned into condos with polished floors and rooftop gyms. Everyone who stood in that room in 1935 is gone, buried in Queens, Brooklyn, or scattered as ashes. But the lesson remained. And the story endured. Every gangster, every hustler, every crime boss who came after Bumpy Johnson learned the same truth Mickey Doyle learned too late. Real power doesn't come from the gun you carry or how many men will answer your call. Real power is knowing that some lines exist and crossing them costs more than territory, more than money. It costs everything. Bumpy Johnson took a slap in front of 200 witnesses and turned it into a story that outlived them all. Not because he was the most violent man in Harlem, but because he knew violence without purpose is just noise, and noise fades. But fear, applied with discipline and remembered for generations, lasts forever. This story is shared for historical insight and reflection, not to glorify violence or crime. If this resonated with you, if you see the lesson Bumpy Johnson left behind, subscribe. Help us reach 1 million subscribers so we can keep telling stories about power, legacy, and consequence. Not stories about destruction, but stories about how real power knows exactly when not to pull the trigger. Next episode drops soon. Until then, remember, real power isn't what you can destroy. It's what you choose to protect.